Hello, my name is Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 173. Wow, managing emotions through research, trauma, stewardship. This is a fascinating vlog, and like so many of these really unusual requests, it has come from you. It's come from a student. Hi to Xana. Xana's working in death studies. She saw the vlog that I did on death and wanted a follow-up vlog about how to manage the complicated emotional landscape that exists when researching topics like this. And indeed, my wonderful student Jen, hi to Jen, has just submitted her PhD exploring notions of personhood for men and women with dementia in residential care. And I'm not embarrassed to say, I put that thesis through its 10 drafts with Jen. And every single time I did a draft, between 4 and 6 occasions during the reading of that draft, I would just be absolutely sobbing. It was the scale of the emotion and the tragedy in some of these stories was just simply overwhelming. And I was simply reading it as a supervisor. And I know a lot of our members of the Right Bunch, hi to the Right Bunch, are working with men and women, family members, moving through palliative care. Okay, so whether you're working through oral histories of the Holocaust, you're researching the violence, the discrimination, the oppression that it impacts on men and women with disabilities, you're looking at the racist and often genocidal history of Indigenous peoples, or indeed the really booming area of first responder research, then there is no doubt that emotions are incredibly important to the work that you do. And look, let's be honest here, really honest here. Most research, whatever the topic, takes a dark turn at some point. And the question is what resources you will have to manage that dark turn. And I just want to say I'm also delivering the vlog very early Sunday morning, as you can hear by the state of my voice. Very, very dark, very, very brooding. But I often talk about in these vlogs, look, I had to have a think about this, so I went to the beanbag to sit cross-legged and have a think. So I thought, well, look, I'll do this particular vlog from the famous beanbag. So this is actually my beanbag where when things go a bit weird for me, I sit cross-legged and I have a bit of a think. But look, this is not simply about men and women with dementia or death studies or palliative care. All research, as I've said, can take this really dark turn. And I always use as an example of this the legendary theoretical physicist Robert Oppenheimer. I'm a big fan. I read a lot of his biography. He's a really complicated, interesting guy. But he was a theoretical physicist, right? But of course he was involved, very strongly involved, his physics was very strongly involved in creating the atomic bomb that exploded in 1945. And he was a really complicated, intricate, delicate man in so many ways. And he was tortured, and I want to use that word, he was tortured about what his research had done and where his research had gone. And he was a very literary, inflected and infused man as well. And through his earlier life, he learnt Sanskrit and he read the Bhagavad Gita in its original. And when later asked about how he felt about his theoretical physics moving into atomic weaponry and then the atomic arms race, he quoted from the Vita and stated, quote, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," end of quote. He was carrying that around. Oppenheimer was a theoretical physicist. Okay, so this vlog could have looked at lots of different areas. It could have looked at insider and outsider status. I was thinking about that, or going rogue during ethnography, which is another big area, or theories of subjectivity. Now, I printed out all those notes and was reading them, but it wasn't quite right. The notes are still upstairs, so if you're interested in any of those areas, I'm happy to develop those up into future vlogs. But instead, I found this remarkable research seam, a very specialist research seam, in how to manage the contexts, how to manage the heightened emotions when doing research. Really powerful area. So Zara, darling, thank you so much for the suggestion here. I wouldn't have got there without you. And it is important, I think, that we recognise that emotions are part of research, just as they are part of life. And I understand why we have this notion of the dispassionate scholar, right? I understand that. That's been sort of a model or a trope through my career as well. But it is just a bit bonkers, and it is a bit silly. And it's also suggesting that emotions somehow impact or deflect from or demean our intellectual life, and that's simply not the case. And Limonero et al. Stated in their research, quote, "Emotions are the most important engine of our lives and facilitate the adaptation into our emotional environment. They influence cognitive superior processes, for example, perception, thinking, decision-making, language, beliefs, motivation, learning, memory." End of quote. So the assumption that any area of research can be objective, dispassionate, can be just empirical or positivist is an assumption. And you know what? It's an incorrect assumption. This is obviously a major area of philosophy, judging from Plato's idealism in particular. This was a form of metaphysical objectivism, obviously, that the ideas, the world, is independent from the individual. So ideas exist out there, and there's a separation from you as a person. So Descartes, Newton, and obviously Kant, and all offer different approaches, different ways of thinking about evidence, about methodology, about how we understand the world. And this is not simply a division. In fact, it has nothing to do at all, to be frank with you, about qualitative or quantitative methods. It's not about that. It's actually a consideration of positivism. Positivism, at its most basic, separates the world out there from human meaning making. So positivism works from the premise that there is a world out there that is static through time and is different from the meaning making that we as humans do. So there's a separation there, right? So basically, we as scholars, when we are confronted by positivism, have to explore what we think of as the relationship between our perception and reality. So is there a reality that exists out there completely independent of our perception? You can think about that question. Is there a reality, though, that exists beyond our perception, or is reality actually created by our perception? Okay, so for those of us who research, I think the challenge is even more fascinating. This is where, when I'm dealing with positivists, and every now and again I still confront a few of them, I sort of say, right, well, if the world exists out there and it's just there and we can just stumble over it, so we just find it as research, there's the world, oh, there's the world, we'll just research it, then why do we need research methods? Because why would we need methods if the world is just out there to discover in its reality? Research methods suggest we need strategies to understand it. Yeah. So of course the selection of methods therefore shapes the type of reality that we're going to find, and the selection of methods requires us to think about our epistemology and our ontology, who we are, so we can select the methods to understand the world around it. So at its most basic, if you will, for us as researchers, we have to think about, can you understand the world if you don't understand yourself? Or actually, do you require some understanding of yourself to even connect with anything exterior to yourself? You've got to also ask yourself, is it possible to park your consciousness, your identity, your sense of self, to explore the world out there, so we can just shut everything off? We can shut our body off, shut our emotional light off, and simply just go, right, well, there's reality to explore, okay? Now, even the most cold, quantitative, empiricist, positivist scholar has a whole series of emotional questions they need to answer. And that is, why are we looking at one topic and not another? Why are we using this method and not another? Why this topic now and not 5 years ago and not 5 years in the future? Why are we using this theory and not another? Why have we developed this hypothesis and not another? Why this lab and not another? And why this supervisor and not another? They're emotional decisions. So ignoring the emotional life of a researcher can be deeply problematic. And we're seeing, I think, a lot of the consequences of the long-term ignoring of the emotional life of researchers with what's happening in our universities at the moment. Now, we all know about the very distressing levels of mental health issues that exist with our PhD students at the moment. But what I think is really disturbing is, and that's dreadful. So we've got a level of mental health concern in PhD students, and that's dreadful. What's even more disturbing is the mental health concerns in academics outside of the PhD program is of a higher percentage than in a PhD program. So in other words, academics have a higher level of mental health concern than the PhD students. So the problem gets worse the more senior you go. Okay, so clearly therefore we as PhD students, we as scholars, are going to require some tools to locate, to recognise, to understand, to manage emotional distress. Clearly, we as academics have to think about how we manage, how we regulate our emotional life. And the emotions that are reported, expressed by PhD students, I think, are incredibly important. Guilt, sadness, feeling overwhelmed is another big one. Frustrated, low self-worth, this imposter syndrome thing, and self-blame. They're the emotions that are listed in studies of PhD programs and PhD students right now. So to complete research, we require what is often described as emotional regulation. That's the key concept for us. And that means that's the capacity to manage and to respond to an extreme emotional state and to regulate it. Now, there are lots of health strategies that can be deployed to do this. Now, I know these seem a bit naff. As an old goth, I'm the first person to go, oh, look, this is a bit hippie. Okay, I'm the first person to do that. But these are the strategies that create emotional regulation, and look, they do work. So don't dismiss it in sort of the well-being stuff. The well-being stuff has some advantages, but what is seen to be useful with emotional regulation for PhD students and researchers more generally are obviously exercise programs, talking with peers, yoga, talk therapies, so seeing a counsellor, talking through that. Writing in a journal is incredibly important. There's some very good research emerging here. So being able to situate your emotions into context through writing a journal. Getting enough sleep is crucial, and also taking breaks. We're going to return to taking breaks shortly. They're the healthy strategies. So if you do them, that creates emotional regulation. I think we all know that's sort of true. The research is showing that. Now, the unhealthy strategies include self-harm, alcohol misuse, withdrawing or avoiding difficult situations, so like not going to your supervisory session, physical aggression, drug misuse, and yes, suicide or attempted suicide. Now, I'm not problematizing or validating anything at all in that spectrum, because all of us have used the problematic strategies. I just want to put that out there. So it's not like, oh, who are those people over there? It's like, team, a paper gets knocked back, something truly dreadful happens to you in the lab, someone says the unsayable to you. Dreadful things happen in universities on a daily basis. I really get that. So I'm not remotely demonising or going, my goodness, who does those things? We all have done those things, okay? Claim it, acknowledge it, bad stuff happens, right? But when you lose the capacity to start to use the healthy strategies day upon day upon day, then that's called emotional dysregulation. Emotional dysregulation. Now, emotional dysregulation has particular characteristics, so do see if you recognise yourself here, and if you do, let's progress this. You need to contact me and we'll have a chat, okay? Emotional dysregulation emerges not when you're experiencing difficult situations. We all experience difficult situations on a daily basis. That's not this story. But what happens is something dreadful happens and you immediately summon an interpretation of that difficult situation that results in a heightened emotional state. So in Brabazon language, I describe this as something happens and you go from 0 to hero emotionally. So bang, something happens. Instead of you sort of going, oh, what's happening? You immediately heighten to a bad emotional state. Most of us have done it at different points. If you're doing it relatively frequently, we need to talk about it. So that means, what it means, guys, is that your emotions, your thoughts, and your behaviour are becoming tangled up. That's what's occurring. And what happens is your research becomes a proxy for you. So you're unable to separate the PhD from yourself. Your PhD is a research project. It's not you. But when something happens to your PhD and you hit that heightened emotional state when something goes wrong, that's the problem. Okay. So instead of recognizing, wow, this is a challenging moment in my research, something bad has just happened. What occurs in my research, right? You suddenly personalize that experience. So something bad has happened to me, you heighten it, and then you deploy those unhealthy strategies to manage those heightened emotions. So these heightened emotions are often panic, insecurity, or frustration. Right, so that's the situation. And if you do recognize yourself there, don't panic about that. We've all done it. Don't panic. Don't panic about it. It happens to all of us, but the frequency becomes an issue to talk about. So, right, there's the story. What are we going to do about it? What does the research say? Well, the research here is superb. There's some great articles, and the one I really do recommend to you is Nicole Johnson. Nicole Johnson's article in Enquire in 2009. Okay, Nicole Johnson. And it's open access, so it's freely available for you. She worked through the emotional state in this piece of her doctoral research. And her doctoral research was on an incredible topic, actually, exploring young regional women's experience of familial breast cancer. So Dr. Johnson had personal experience in this research topic. Her own mother died of breast cancer when she was 15. So she knew it would be emotionally demanding. She knew that going in. But she also knew how incredibly important the research was. So you can see the blessing of both sides. She fully understood the raw nature of the emotions and the information that she would gather. She knew that when she was studying a social world, it was going to be an intensely emotional social world. And she did experience fatigue, she did experience burnout, and she realised very early on she was much more than an agent of data collection. What happened was her private emotional life did meet with her professional research life. They did meet. So how did she manage that meeting of the private and the public? Well, and these strategies, they all work, use them. She journaled her way through the research process, and that journaling enabled her to locate or position herself within the research in a healthy way. Secondly, her supervisors were not only intellectual supporters, but emotional supporters. I know a lot of supervisors watch these vlogs. Hi team, much respect to you. For these sorts of topics, the supervision itself is different. So we as supervisors have to go into the situation knowing there's the intellectual support, but more is going to be demanded of us. So we have to have a good sense of that going in, I think. She accessed a private counsellor when required throughout it, so she knew at the start she was going to do that. She met a counsellor she was comfortable with and used that counsellor at regular intervals. She also did some important things in data collection. She created spaces between her interviews so that after each story that was told to her, she could process it, she could interpret it, she could sit with it and situate with it and contextualize it. So she could sit in a metaphoric beanbag and ponder that story before she moved to the next one. And that avoided moments of burnout and created moments of, you've guessed it, rest. So I think she provides a fantastic model as a researcher in and through these difficult spaces. I think all of those strategies are outstanding, and I recommend that article to you. But there are some general strategies, I think, for all of us to introduce that are proactive. So just start with, this could be a problem, let's all do this positively, rather than have it as a reactive strategy for researchers. So particularly if you are an insider on particular research projects, I would implement these from the start. So the first thing to recognise, I think, is that all research is an act of emotional labour. I'm going to say that again. All research is an act of emotional labour. Claim that, own that, understand that. And the question, I think, for Xana and for all of us is, when we're researching these really emotionally challenging and charged topics, or something really unexpected emerges in our research, which happens all the time, that's what research is, what do we do to regulate those emotions? What do we do? What are the three strategies? Well, there are three in the literature. Let's do them quickly. One, and it's important, take care of your physical needs. It's weird, you know, as a Dean of Graduate Research and as someone who's worked in this space for, 20, 25 years, it's amazing how little we talk about the body of a PhD student or the body of a supervisor and the physical health. And it is everything, you know, it is absolutely everything. So take care of your physical needs. And that means sleep. It means rest. It means eating healthy food, exercising, making these proactive decisions. These health strategies are part of your research. Strategy two, engage in activities that build a sense of achievement. So this is crucial. Create micro achievements inside and outside of your PhD. Now, these may be incredibly small, like doing the laundry. Can I say, as someone who is challenged doing the laundry, I've told you this, I'm about 30 hours behind in house cleaning most weeks. Laundry is a challenge for me, getting the clothes into like the laundry environment, getting the washing machine going, hanging the clothes out, bringing them back in, putting them away. These are micro traumas for me on a daily basis. I wish I was joking, okay? So me actually doing those micro achievements, wow, you know, I've actually got the laundry done. That's a big deal. I'm actually not joking. So claim these sort of micro achievements in your private personal life, but also in your PhD and your research life. So when you find that really difficult reference, okay, acknowledge these positive achievements. Wow, I've done this. Doesn't matter how small the event is. Acknowledge the private achievement. And the goal, team, is to keep doing these micro achievements and acknowledging them to create that narrative of success. Nothing is too small. Acknowledge every success. 3, this one changed my life. Luckily, I realised this really, really early, like when I was about 18, 19. And the research literature shows it too, but it's funny. So it's an experiential thing I realised that the research literature verifies. That's 3. Changing your thoughts is easier than changing your emotions. Changing your thoughts is easier than changing your emotions. So when you become emotionally uneven, ask yourself what thoughts led you into that feeling. Because what happens is, when you create a way of thinking, you create a way of feeling. You know, in a cliched fashion now, we call this a trigger warning these days. You know, trigger warning, trigger warning. It's become a cliche, but there is really important content behind the phrase trigger warning, right? Is there a topic or an idea or a phrase or often a smell that you experience, and then it hits you into a heightened emotional, visceral response? So a cascade of emotions emerge from that sensory experience. Once that intensity has subsided, you can't do anything when you're in the middle of that heightened state, but once the intensity has subsided, what I need you to do for me is ask yourself a series of questions. What thoughts started that intense sensory experience? Why was your reaction so strong? What created the intensity? And then the crucial strategy to get you out the other side. How important is that thought or that idea now? How important will it be tomorrow? In a week's time? In a month's time? In a year's time? In 10 years' time? What you're doing there is you're replacing something that's hot and disturbing and intense right now in a much broader context, 10 years, so that is able to cool and recontextualize that emotional state. So all of these strategies can move you through problems and issues before, during, but also after these complicated emotional intensities emerged. So they're the strategies, the concrete small to medium term strategies to help you. The final little bit of the vlog though is I wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to do something long term. I wanted to do something infrastructural, as I always do. And I wanted to introduce to you a concept that I'm going to apply in doctoral education at Flinders University, and I'm writing about very strongly at the moment. And this concept is called trauma stewardship. I'll say it again, trauma stewardship. Now, trauma stewardship as a concept, as a phrase, is derived from a 2009 scholarly monograph, a book written by Laura Van Dernet Lipsey. Van Dernet Lipsey, remarkable woman, with Connie Burke. And the full title of the book, which I will give you, is Trauma Stewardship, an Everyday Guide to Caring for Self while Caring for Others. Wow. Now, those of us, I think, that research in these areas, but also support people that do research, gain a great deal about thinking through a context or a matrix of trauma stewardship. So if we research social change, and most of us do, if we research social trauma, so homelessness, child abuse, domestic violence, substance abuse, natural disasters, first responder research, abuse of animals, prison work, just to name a few, that requires something a hell of a lot more actually than simply a careful discussion with your supervisor or noting that counselling is available. Trauma stewardship, therefore, is a frame, a context, and a trope. And I think it's something that we in universities can apply, and you know what, going forward, we must apply. It is a daily practice for individuals, for organisations, and for society, and it creates spaces. In fact, it doesn't create, it creates, but it also leaves spaces to manage, discuss, research, and tend to hardship, pain, and trauma, while also respecting those men and women who not only research but support those who research, so those who help manage those moving through trauma. So I think very strongly about my colleagues in the Office of Graduate Research. As I often say, we see the students on the best day of their lives and the worst day of their lives. We get phone calls, we get emails that are beyond most people's belief, to be frank with you. And my staff on a daily basis get a fair amount of buffeting. So I went to this phrase firstly to care for my staff in the Office of Graduate Research and the support staff throughout Flinders University. But actually it's about you as students, it's about supervisors, but it is also about our wonderful administrators, our professional colleagues who people forget about and are actually helping you move through your life, and who's helping them. So trauma stewardship is a concept to enable them as well. So Van Dernet Lipsey stated that, quote, the most important technique in trauma stewardship is learning to stay fully present in the experience, no matter how difficult. Now I love that. Fully present in the experience, no matter how difficult. End of quote. So this is a personal, a political, but also a professional strategy. Recognizing, and again, this is a crucial moment of my life when I realized this, we have no power over just about everything that happens in our life. No power over people, over things, over events. We have no control over the things that happen to us. Full stop. I find that quite empowering. But we do have power over how we interpret those events and ideas and people and how we understand them. No power over the stuff that happens, none at all. Let it go. If you want power, not going to happen. But you do have power over how you interpret and understand those events, those peoples, those emotional states. So probably the best definition of high quality research I've ever developed, I think, is the ability to occupy, to live in the present with all its sensory complexity. For me, that's good research. Being in the present, whether you're in an archive, reading fantastic archival documents, whether you're doing digital desk research, whether you're in a lab, whether you're in field work, whether you're in a wet lab, wherever you may be, in an ethnographic experience in field work, wherever you are, occupy the present in all its sensory complexity. Live it, experience, understand it. The intense occupation of the present, I think, allows us to be rigorous, considerate, but also engaged researchers. It allows us to live with the consequences of our role as a researcher and really understand the people and the ideas that we're investigating. And I think we always have to remember that PhD students are people first. I think we often forget that. You guys come into our program as fully formed human beings. And you also have to remember too, your supervisors are fully formed human beings before you met them. All of us as PhD students, as researchers, we are people first. And I know that many of you out there are doing research at the moment and you're working through an emotional state that is pretty challenging most of the time. I know that, and I also know most days you feel like it's overwhelming you. I understand that. But what I would say to you today is this is not about you. This is about all of us. Deans, academics, our support staff, your fellow PhD students, your peers. All of us creating trauma stewardship and spaces for difficult conversations, moments, expressions and feelings. And I often think about my wonderful project officer. Most of you know wonderful Lisa Warren, very good friend of mine. Lisa Warren and I, we focus very strongly on a daily basis in the Office of Graduate Research to leave spaces. Students walk in, send us an email, get on the phone and they're often crying or upset or worried, supervisors as well. And we activate trauma stewardship on a daily basis, and we do that by gently leaving spaces in our day. So if something happens, we handle that in real time, and whatever else is occurring, we are actively present with the person when they're going through this situation. We are with them, moving them through that. And we do that by being calm, being relaxed, and knowing, you know what, life loops, life creates spaces, and let's just sit in this space now and move through it together. That's trauma stewardship. So this happens when all of us as researchers, as citizens, occupy an active phase. As researchers, as scholars, we occupy the present. And also recognise that you're not alone. You're never alone. Trauma stewardship is a matrix that enfolds you, that gives you spaces to walk and feel and think and achieve. Thank you, Zana. Great suggestion. I wish you love, light and peace. Tia.